So to start, we're going to put the sky in, and I'm just going to wet some areas loosely, leaving some openings for where the clouds are, and I'll start by just dropping in some blues. So I mixed my blue with a tiny bit of rose and add a little bit of the turquoise to lighten it. And just kind of float those blues in there, and I go over the hillside and allow for everything to have some nice soft edges. And then I'll mix some gray with the yellow, the rose, and pull that orange into the blue, and that gives me sort of a nice cloud gray color. And I touch most of the edges, but leave some areas unconnected. And then go ahead and soften up that bottom area. This will dry lighter since it's all wet into wet. And we want the sky to be one of the lightest values on the page. So once that is dried a bit, I'm going to start putting in the background mountain, and I have some mud color already in my tray. I'll add that to the blue, add some rose to purple it a bit, and then a little more yellow will dull it down. And I have the scarlet. I'm pulling a little scarlet into there as well till I get the right sort of far away mountain color that I need. And then I'm just going to sort of scrape in to the peak where it's snowy, and I'll get most of the water out of my brush. Just make some little scrapey marks and not connect it all the way. And now, while it's still wet, I'm going to pull down the next color, which is sort of a brown. I'm just pulling in some orange and some yellow into that blue mix. And I'm going to carefully go around the roofs of my little houses. And I'm going to keep going to the next color so that everything is connected and touching and flowing in. So I was just charging that color up a little bit so it wasn't too pale. Now I'm just adding more yellow to that mix to get a lighter beigey brown. And that's the base color for the hillside here. So when I need to get around things, I just hold my brush upside down and use the point of the brush to help get around those chimneys and things. I want to keep those clear. And I carve out around the top of that truck and just pull down to the bottom of the road there. So now I'm going to use more of that same color, and I'll get under the roof, do the house, and go up to the other side of the road and pull that down, keeping the car empty. Now I want to build up my greens, and I want to have everything getting darker as it comes forward. So I'm using a lot of the French ultramarine with my warm yellow, and then adding bits of the scarlet into it as well. Get a nice dulled down green. And I'm leaving some of the beige showing through. And then I'll mix it together a bit with my fingers. And here I just want to get lots of nice darks built up in the front and drop in different textures. So I'll sprinkle some paint on and flick my fingers with some water into there. And here I've got some extra red added into it to get some kind of warmer tones. And just one last layer of darks right in the front there. And just let that process and do its thing. So now I'm adding in some greens into the hillside back here and just giving the ground some shape and lumps by adding in these green shadows. And then I'll use that same green mix. It's just the French ultramarine and the warm yellow makes that dulled down green. And with a watery brush, I'll put in a layer of little background trees. And I'll keep these soft and transparent. And then I'll come on top of those with a more dry brush and thicker paint. So I get this mixture darker by adding some rose or some of the scarlet into that green, and that'll darken it even more. using a brush to scrape in some little fence posts. So I catch this while the paint is still moist, but not too wet. And then with a dry brush, I'll kind of wiggle some of that paint up to give those trees some tops. And before I go on with more trees, I'm going to put this dark part of the house inside here, skipping around the window area. And for this, I just mixed a dark brown with the French ultramarine and the orange. And I'll add a tiny bit of color to the roof because I don't want it to be too white. And here I'm just kind of blending in that house into the hillside a little bit with some more green shadows. And now we can start putting the darks behind the roof over here and getting those tall trees up on the hillside. So I'm careful to go around the chimneys. And I won't fill the area in completely. I'll leave some little holes where you can see through. And then I'll just dry brush scratch these other trees up into here. So I'm skipping around and keeping some openings so that things don't appear too heavy. And while it's still wet enough, I'm going to put some scrapes. So I've got some trunks. I'll just build up my darks a little bit more. It is important to have that good contrast in there. And here I'm going over my house a little bit too much accidentally. But did add a tree to add another layer in front of there. So now I'm going to mix a really soft grayed down turquoise color, very light and watery for that rooftop. And just scrape on a little bit of color and texture to that house. And scrape on some road. And then I added some lines on there that are a little too heavy, so I just blot them off. And I'll mix some very dark with the orange and the blue for the shadows. And then throw in this nice, beautiful, bright red. So just make sure my darks are dark enough, and I'll put my little windows in. And kind of tie it together with some more shadows. And I'm going to lift some of that back out because I got a little too heavy there. And then I'll give these chimneys some shading. Alright, so now I adjusted my shading on the house enough. I'm going to put in that truck. And the trucks are easy. They're just two rectangles. So I just put the shadow on the one side of the windshield there, and then get dark in the front grille. And then I kind of carve out the headlights. And add a nice shadow underneath it. And then lastly, I'm going to throw in some extra darks along the roadside. And then here, just scrape in a little bird up in the sky. Oh, and then we'll add a couple of power poles. And with an X-Acto knife, I'll just scrape in a couple of highlights here on those fence posts to make them pop a little more. And then break up along the road a little bit. And there you have it.